Well, joining me now is France 24's James André, who travelled to Mosul in 2017, just after the Islamic State group had fallen. And look, James, you saw the Nuri Mosque back then. What do you remember of it?
Well, what I remember is a bit of a heap of rubble, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think we have the footage we filmed back then with George Yazbek and Abdallah Malkawi. But yeah, we managed to negotiate an access because at the time, the whole zone was a closed military area simply because it was very dangerous, because most of the buildings were about to collapse. There was a lot of unexploded ordnance on the site. And of course, there was also bodies that were still in the rubble at that stage. So what had happened at that stage is that indeed there had been a lot of bombing by the international coalition. This is why you have this type of damage. There were huge holes everywhere. Some of them you could see. I remember seeing a car in it and thinking it looked like a toy. The craters were so big. And indeed, the whole city was absolutely destroyed. And what the army had done was simply use bulldozers to create roads in the rubble so that you could access the Nuri Mosque. And when we got there, well, what we discovered was indeed the mosque completely destroyed, and people telling us that it would take years to clear all that up and indeed, make this part of the city inhabitable again. So it's interesting down the line, because it's been 7, nearly 8 years, to see how much has been done. And indeed, of course, for a lot of people in Mosul, having the Nuri Mosque destroyed was very symbolic.
And look, one of the big challenges when it's come to the reconstruction over the past 7 years or so, James, has been the number of unexploded mines that were left behind, presumably by ISIS.
Well, ISIS it was the site of heavy bombing. So yes, there was ISIS. ISIS was using a lot of booby traps. So they had trapped a lot of buildings. There were a lot of systems. We actually remember during that filming, well, that was a shell that was unexploded, but we saw a lot of explosive belts that had been prepared, to be used as weapons in terrorist attacks. So yes, there was a lot of explosive that was there, and then there was unexploded bombs as well. So the whole place was very, very difficult to access. And at that stage, people who wanted to access their former houses were allowed to do so. They had to ask for a permit, and they had to follow a specific path, if you will, to go to their house and only go to their house because it was considered too dangerous to step out of that path. That gives you an idea of the level of destruction we witnessed over there. And then, of course, the other thing which was impressive at that moment was coming back after 3 years of Islamic State rule with, for example, I remember speaking to a teacher, because of course there's also the mines as well as the damage, the physical damage. He was telling me back then that he was a teacher, that he chose to stay because his family was there, because he had elderly relatives. He stayed. The number of children at the school fell from about 120 to 4. Then he was moved to another school where he was asked to take care of these kids and, apply what the Islamic State group wanted children to learn. There he got caught smoking a cigarette and eventually got kicked out. But that gives you an idea of the life people were living inside Mosul at the time. So, yes, they were, the city was liberated, but everything was destroyed and people were distraught after that experience for 3 years.
And look, 7.5 years on then from the destruction of the mosque, it's been rebuilt, it's back. What do you think that means for the people of Mosul?
Well, I think it means a lot. I think it means that the city's back. I mean, that mosque was built in 1172. Its importance is shown by the fact that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi himself chose that place to declare the caliphate. So that gives you an idea of the importance of that mosque for the city. And the fact that it has been rebuilt, that it is back, is obviously something which is important because it's a symbol of this city re-emerging from the rubble. Now, I'd like us to listen to what Audrey Azoulay had to say. She's the head of UNESCO, and she was there for this inauguration.
I've seen here is extraordinary. You have now also an expertise which you can use throughout the country and even beyond. And this also is a treasure. We have created 7,700 local jobs. We've invested in education, in the classroom. All these efforts have, I think, benefited the community as a whole, and opens new perspectives for peace, for reconciliation.
So you see that indeed gives you the figures, but al-Nuri Mosque has been rebuilt, but most of the old city has not at this stage been rebuilt. There are still houses because it's like a maze of very small streets. This is why it was bombed, by the way, because it's very difficult to, lead a ground assault on, because it's such, it was like a Medina. So what happened was there was extensive damage, and yes, this mosque is rebuilt, but a lot of the old city isn't. And of course, for people, they're saying, right, it looks very modern, it's slightly different than it was. And of course, the whole of Mosul will definitely be a little different from what it was before.
All right, very poignant. Thanks very much, James André, for us there.